Quentin Knox adjusted the strap of his utility pack and squinted up at the looming shape of the alien ship. It wasn't the ship's size that made his palms sweat. It was the 100 or so Varusians lined up at the ramp, each one taller than a Clydesdale and twice as jumpy. Their scaly skin glistened under the twin suns, and their long arms clutched at sleek translation devices that buzzed softly. Captain Seltrax, the Varusian leader, stepped forward. His skin shimmered a pale blue as he looked at Quentin with something that might have been suspicion, or maybe just indigestion. Quentin wasn't sure yet. "You are the human liaison," Seltrax said in a voice that sounded like dry leaves scraping pavement. "Yeah," Quentin said, offering a handshake instinctively. Seltrax recoiled, staring at the offered hand like it was a live snake. Quentin let it drop. "Right, no handshakes." Seltrax narrowed his eyes. "We proceed cautiously, your kind, unpredictable." Quentin forced a smile. "That's fair." The exchange might have ended there if a loud, guttural bark hadn't shattered the tension. From the edge of the landing zone, a dog bolted out a scrappy, mud-streaked mutt with one floppy ear and a mouth full of mischief. Quentin's stomach dropped. Scraps, no. Quentin shouted, but the dog had already chosen its target. With the single-minded devotion only a dog could muster, Scraps barreled straight toward the towering aliens. Seltrax took a single step back. His guards raised elaborate shock lances, but Quentin sprinted ahead of them, arms flailing. "He's friendly, just..." Quentin tackled Scraps mid-leap, both man and dog hitting the dusty ground with a grunt. Scraps wagged his tail happily, tongue lolling, completely unaware of the chaos he'd almost caused. Seltrax loomed over Quentin, his body vibrating with visible horror. "It bit you." "No," Quentin said, hauling himself to his knees. "He just licked me, it's fine." "You bleed." Seltrax pointed at Quentin's arm where Scraps' paw had scratched him. Quentin glanced down. A thin line of blood trickled from a shallow scrape. He wiped it on his pants. "Just a scratch." Seltrax leaned heavily on his translator. "Bites, scratches, saliva, rabies." The way he said rabies sounded like he was announcing an execution. Quentin, still catching his breath, laughed once before realizing Seltrax wasn't joking. He pushed Scraps aside gently and stood up, wincing as his knee twinged. "Okay, look," Quentin said. "Rabies is serious, sure, but it's not the end of the world. We have vaccines. I'll just get a quick shot." Seltrax flinched. "Quick." "Yeah, quick," Quentin said. "Nurse sticks a needle in. I'm good to go." Seltrax muttered something to his second in command, a shorter Varusian with greenish skin. The guards around them tightened their formation, casting suspicious glances at Scraps, who was now rolling happily in the dirt. "You are contaminated," Seltrax said sharply. "You must be isolated." Quentin held up his hands. "Whoa, hold on, it's not like that. I'm not infected, it's just a precaution." Seltrax wasn't listening. He barked an order and two guards lunged forward, grabbing Quentin by the arms. Quentin grunted as they hoisted him off the ground. "Hey, I said it's not contagious," Quentin shouted, struggling. "You can't get rabies from looking at me." The guards ignored him, carting him toward a translucent containment pod that had been set up nearby. Quentin dug his heels into the dirt, but the Varusians were strong, and he was already tired from tackling Scraps. Inside the pod, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and something metallic. Quentin sat heavily on the single bench, rubbing his bruised arms. Seltrax stood outside, tapping rapidly on a console. "I need to get to a hospital," Quentin said, raising his voice. "Not sit in a bubble." Seltrax didn't even look up. "Containment first, cure after." "Cure," Quentin said. "You think I need a cure? I just need a vaccine." Seltrax finally met his eyes. "We have studied your diseases, rabies, fatal, always, no cure." Quentin leaned his head back against the wall, laughing weakly. "Yeah, if you don't get the shots, but we know how to handle it. I've had post-exposure shots before." Seltrax's face twisted with visible disbelief. "You have survived this. Death disease." "I didn't have rabies," Quentin said. "I got bitten by a raccoon when I was a kid. They gave me a series of shots and I was fine." Cell tracks looked like Quentin had just announced he could breathe underwater. Quentin stood up, wincing again as his scraped arm throbbed. Listen, you're making a big deal out of nothing. Let me out of here, I'll call for medical transport, get my shot, and we're good. Cell tracks hesitated. The second in command leaned in, whispering something. Cell tracks nodded once. You will submit to our tests first, Cell tracks said. Quentin sighed. Fine, whatever gets me out of this fishbowl. 2 Varishan medics entered, one carrying a scanner the size of a microwave. Quentin eyed it warily. That thing's not gonna fry my brain, is it? No, the medic said. Only detect pathogens. Great, Quentin muttered. They waved the scanner over him, frowning at the screen. Quentin stayed still, tapping his foot impatiently. After several minutes, the medic turned to Cell tracks and shook his head. No rabies detected, he said. Quentin threw his arms up. See. I told you. Cell tracks still looked uneasy. Symptoms may not show immediately, true, Quentin admitted. Which is why I need the vaccine, just let me get it. Cell tracks conferred with his guards, their hissing language prickling the air. Finally, he turned to Quentin. We escort you. Quentin grinned. Sure, field trip. The walk back to the transport shuttle was slow. Quentin limped slightly, his knee stiffening up. The Varishans fanned out around him like an honor guard, startling every human technician they passed. Scraps trotted behind them, tail wagging. Blissfully unaware, he had almost started an intergalactic incident. At the base's infirmary, Quentin sat patiently while Nurse Ramirez prepped a syringe. Cell tracks and 2 guards watched from behind a glass partition, their faces a mixture of horror and fascination. All right, Quentin, Ramirez said, tapping the syringe. Standard rabies post-exposure protocol. 1 shot today, then follow-ups. Hit me, Quentin said. Ramirez swabbed his arm and injected the vaccine. Quentin flinched slightly but held still. Across the glass, Cell tracks recoiled as if Quentin had been stabbed. Done, Ramirez said, slapping a bandage on his arm. You'll need to come back for the full course. Got it, Quentin said, rolling his sleeve down. Cell tracks entered cautiously, eyeing the bandage like it might explode. You are cured, Cell tracks asked. Quentin shook his head. No, vaccinated, protection, not cure. Cell tracks' confusion deepened. You invite poison into your body. To survive poison, Quentin chuckled. Yeah, pretty much. Cell tracks stared at him for a long moment, then turned to his second in command. Humans are unstable. Hey, Quentin said, raising a hand. We're adaptable. Cell tracks tilted his head. There is a difference, Quentin shrugged. Depends who you ask. Scraps barked once, wagging his tail. Cell tracks flinched again. You should probably get used to dogs, Quentin said. They're everywhere. Cell tracks made a low, grumbling noise that Quentin suspected was the Varishan equivalent of a groan. You will not approach our delegation again until fully vaccinated, Cell tracks said. Quentin smiled. Fine by me, I'll stay over here with Scraps. Cell tracks backed away, muttering to his guards. Quentin watched them retreat, then sat down heavily on a bench, scratching Scraps behind the ears. Well, buddy, he said, guess we made an impression. Scraps licked his hand affectionately. Quentin leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. The scrape on his arm still stung and his knee ached, but all things considered, it could have been worse. He had survived first contact with a panicked alien species, a potential rabies scare, and a very aggressive decontamination protocol, all in a day's work. The next morning, Quentin sat slumped in a folding chair in the infirmary waiting room, sipping lukewarm coffee from a cracked plastic mug. Scraps lay curled at his feet, snoring faintly. Every so often, a metallic clatter echoed from the hallway as Varishan guards clomped past, their long limbs knocking into ceiling panels that had clearly not been designed with them in mind. Ramirez poked her head out from the main clinic door. Quentin, booster time. He rose stiffly, setting the mug on the floor. Scraps lifted his head, blinked lazily, and went back to sleep. Quentin followed Ramirez into the sterile room where a fresh syringe gleamed on a tray. You look like you slept in a dryer, Ramirez said, rubbing a wipe over his arm. Close, Quentin muttered. Camp cot in a storage closet. Luxury accommodations, she said, jabbing the needle in without ceremony. You're doing fine. 3 more boosters over the next 2 weeks, you'll be golden. No signs of infection. No fever, no weird tingling, no hydrophobia, Quentin said. Unless you count how dry the coffee was. She chuckled and stuck a neon green sticker on his file. All right, go on. The lizards are probably climbing the walls waiting to see if you sprouted tentacles overnight. Quentin pulled his sleeve down and wandered back into the main hall, where a cluster of Varishan dignitaries stood stiffly around a potted fern, whispering heatedly. Celtrax was at the center, his skin flushed a dull maroon. Quentin hesitated, then walked over. Celtrax's eyes locked onto him immediately. You have survived. Stage 1, Quentin rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah, humans are tougher than we look. What's up? Celtrax gestured sharply to his second, who produced a small, glittering cube. It floated in the air between them, humming faintly. We have demanded full biological records on your kind's diseases, Celtrax said. Your authorities provided concerning information. Quentin raised an eyebrow. Concerning how, Celtrax tapped the cube, which projected a rotating list of illnesses. Quentin recognized some of them: measles, tuberculosis, tetanus. Others had names that sounded more like bad sci-fi movie titles. You survive, Celtrax said, pointing at the list, repeatedly with primitive remedies. Well, medicine's improved a lot, Quentin said. We've had a lot of practice. Celtrax leaned closer, his breath faintly metallic. You contract infections that melt flesh, you recover, you lose limbs, you replace them, you suffer organ failure, you invent machines to mimic your hearts. Quentin shrugged. Adapt or die, right? Celtrax's jaw worked silently for a moment before he turned to the group behind him. They chattered in high, hissing bursts, glancing at Quentin as if he might suddenly shed his skin. Another Varishan, shorter and broader across the shoulders, stepped forward. He wore a silver sash that glinted under the lights. I am Vrexel, he said, tapping his translator briefly. We require demonstration. Quentin blinked. Demonstration of what? Vrexel's face remained impassive. Resilience. Quentin crossed his arms. You want me to what? Wrestle a bear? Celtrax flicked his fingers impatiently. No, controlled trial, observation. Before Quentin could object, Vrexel produced a thin rod about the length of a pencil. It crackled faintly at one end. Quentin took a step back. Whoa, what's that? Minor discomfort, Vrexel said. Test of recovery. Quentin narrowed his eyes. You're not zapping me with that thing. Celtrax tilted his head. You endure worse. Medical records show repeated exposure to electric shocks. That's called defibrillation, Quentin said. It's done under controlled conditions when someone's heart stops. This is controlled, Vrexel said. Not the same, Quentin muttered. Not even close. Celtrax folded his arms, posture stiff. If you refuse, we must assume your resilience is exaggerated. Quentin glanced around. Ramirez was nowhere in sight. Scraps was still snoring by the chairs. No backup. He sighed heavily. Fine, he said. But you don't touch me with that cattle prod. I'll show you resilience another way. Celtrax tapped his fingers against his arm. Explain. Quentin thought for a second, then grinned. Ever heard of blood donation? The Varishans exchanged confused looks. Quentin sat down on a low bench and rolled up his sleeve again. Humans voluntarily drain blood from themselves to help others. No injury, no sickness. We just give it away. Celtrax's eyes narrowed in suspicion. Cannot survive loss of blood. Small amounts, yeah, we can, Quentin said, and our bodies make more. Watch. He grabbed a nearby medkit, rummaging until he found a sterile syringe and a collection bag. Clumsy, but it would do. He tied a rubber strap around his bicep and found a vein, then carefully inserted the needle. The blood flowed steadily into the bag. Quentin leaned back against the wall, tapping his foot to some imaginary beat. The Varishans leaned in, staring. One of them made a low, horrified sound. You're draining your life force, Vrexel said. Quentin smiled lazily. And when I'm done, I'll have a cookie and some juice. Celltrax looked genuinely rattled now, his skin changing to a mottled gray-green. He turned to Vrexel, muttering something sharp and urgent. After about 5 minutes, Quentin clamped off the flow, pulled the needle out and pressed a gauze pad to the spot. "Ta-da," he said. "Still alive." Celltrax stared at the bag of dark red fluid, then at Quentin, then back at the bag. "You willingly diminish yourself," Celltrax said slowly. "For others?" "Yep," Quentin said. "We call it being decent." Vrexel's hands twitched at his sides, an involuntary reaction Quentin had started to recognize as deep discomfort. "You are a violent species," Vrexel said, "yet you bleed for strangers." "That's humanity for you," Quentin said, tossing the blood bag onto a nearby counter. Contradictions all the way down. Celltrax's posture softened slightly, though his face remained unreadable. "You endure injury, disease, loss, and persist." Quentin wiped his arm with an alcohol pad. "We don't really have a choice. World keeps spinning whether we like it or not." The Varishans huddled together again, whispering in frantic bursts. Quentin sat patiently, watching a maintenance bot trundle past, dragging a broken ceiling tile. After a few minutes, Celltrax turned back. "We must reassess." "About time," Quentin said, standing up and stretching. "Can I go now? I need a real breakfast." Celltrax hesitated. "Your resilience is noted, but concerns remain." Quentin grabbed his jacket off the back of the chair. "Concerns are a two-way street, pal. You think I'm not worried about you guys accidentally vaporizing half the base because you misinterpret a sneeze?" Celltrax's mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. "We seek only to understand." "Try asking next time," Quentin said, "instead of waving stun sticks around." He whistled and Scraps bounded to his feet, tail wagging furiously. Celltrax watched the dog carefully but did not retreat this time. Progress, Quentin thought. As Quentin headed toward the mess hall, Vrexel called after him, "You will submit to further observation." Quentin turned, walking backward for a few steps. "As long as it doesn't involve electrocuting me or cutting off limbs, sure." Vrexel made a complicated hand gesture Quentin didn't understand. He waved it off. "Later, lizard bros," Quentin said and disappeared around the corner, Scraps trotting happily at his heels. Back in the infirmary, Celltrax turned to Vrexel. "Prepare a new protocol," he said. "One that requires no physical harm." Vrexel hesitated. "They are unpredictable." Celltrax's skin shimmered faintly silver. "Yes, but they are invaluable." Vrexel bowed slightly, and the two disappeared into the sprawling corridors of the human base, already plotting their next cautious step into the baffling chaos that was humanity. 2 days after the blood demonstration, Quentin found himself back on the landing field, this time under a canvas awning hastily set up to create a neutral interaction zone. The Varishans had insisted on it apparently. Exposure to the base's chaotic layout was causing unwanted cognitive dissonance. Quentin didn't argue. He was just glad Scraps had been formally banned from the area. The sun was brutal overhead, baking the dust into a hard crust. Quentin shifted uncomfortably on the metal stool they'd provided, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. Across from him, Celltrax and Vrexel stood flanked by 4 guards, their posture rigid, as if bracing for spontaneous combustion. Celltrax opened a small black case and withdrew a series of holographic slides, projecting them into the air between them. Each one showed a human doing something increasingly unsettling, running marathons with artificial legs, scaling cliffs after spinal injuries, swimming across icy channels for charity. "You engage in voluntary suffering," Celltrax said. Quentin sipped from a battered water bottle that had gone tepid. "Yeah, sometimes it's about pushing limits, proving to yourself you can still do it." Vrexel tapped a slide showing a human covered in frost, grinning with cracked lips after completing a polar expedition. "You risk death." "For self-validation." "Pretty much," Quentin said. "No one said it was smart." Celltrax studied him for a long moment, then flicked the slides away with a gesture. "We require final verification." Quentin leaned back slightly. "Verification of what?" Human recovery from non-lethal injury, Celtrax said. Direct observation. Quentin tapped his fingers restlessly against his thigh. You guys sure have a one-track mind. Our protocols demand thoroughness, Celtrax said. From a side table, Vrexel picked up a small, sealed container marked with universal biohazard symbols. Quentin stiffened. What's that? He asked, wary. A controlled pathogen, Vrexel said. Non-fatal to your species, causes minor symptoms. Temporary. Quentin stood up, crossing his arms. You want to infect me with something? Celtrax inclined his head. Under strict supervision. Monitored recovery. Quentin stared at them, then at the container, then back again. He thought about the last 2 days, the blood draw, the endless questioning, the way every human technician they passed whispered behind their hands about the guy who made the aliens think rabies was an extinction-level event. He exhaled slowly through his nose. What pathogen? Rhinovirus, Celtrax said. Common among your kind, Quentin blinked. You want to give me a cold? Celtrax nodded once. Quentin laughed despite himself. That's your big test, a head cold. Symptoms include congestion, coughing, slight fever, Vrexel said, reading from a data slate. Recovery within several of your standard days. I know what a cold is, Quentin said. He ran a hand through his hair, grimacing. Fine, you want to watch me sneeze for a week. Let's get it over with. Celtrax retrieved a small nasal spray device from the container, holding it between 2 clawed fingers like it might explode. You administer, Celtrax said. Quentin took the device, inspecting it. Single dose, preloaded, no tampering. He tilted his head back and fired the spray up his nostrils. It burned slightly, but otherwise felt no different from any over-the-counter medicine. Happy now, he said, tossing the empty device onto the table. Celtrax and Vrexel watched him intently, as if expecting him to burst into flames. Quentin sat back down and waited. An hour passed. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the field. Quentin's nose began to run. He sniffled loudly and wiped it on his sleeve. Symptom onset detected, Vrexel said, noting it down with a stylus. Congratulations, Quentin croaked. You've given me the sniffles. By evening, Quentin's throat felt scratchy and his eyes burned. They moved him into a mobile med tent, where a bored-looking corpseman took his vitals every hour. Celtrax and Vrexel set up a bank of monitors just outside, reviewing every cough and sneeze with forensic seriousness. The next morning, Quentin woke with a pounding headache and sinuses packed tighter than a cargo bay. Ramirez checked his temperature, a mild fever, and gave him fluids and paracetamol. Celtrax hovered outside the tent flap. You are deteriorating. Quentin blew his nose into a wad of tissues and tossed it into a growing mountain by the cot. Congratulations, it's called a cold. Vrexel approached cautiously, holding a small recording device. Describe your sensations. Quentin glared up at him. I feel like a garbage truck ran over my face. Twice. Vrexel recorded the statement solemnly. By midday, Quentin's voice had dropped half an octave and he was coughing intermittently. Ramirez stuck an oxygen monitor on his finger, humming a tune under her breath. Celtrax paced outside, scales darkened to a murky green. He weakens rapidly. He's fine, Ramirez said without looking up. Typical viral course, intervention may be required, Vrexel said. Quentin waved a limp hand. Stay out of it. My immune system's got this. Hours dragged by. Quentin dozed fitfully, woken periodically by sneezing fits. The Varishans refused to leave, taking frantic notes every time he groaned or shifted position. Late that night, Quentin sat up slowly, head pounding but slightly clearer. The fever had broken. He wiped sweat from his brow and accepted a bottle of water from Ramirez. Feel about 10% human again, he rasped. Celtrax was at the tent entrance in an instant. You have recovered, getting there, Quentin said, voice hoarse. Told you, humans bounce back. Celtrax exchanged a look with Vrexel. This confirms adaptability, Vrexel nodded gravely. Confirmed. Quentin leaned back against the cot frame, exhausted. So do I get a medal or something? Celtrax straightened to his full height. We have prepared a formal acknowledgement. Vrexel shuffled off and returned moments later with a small, metallic object. It looked like a flattened coin, etched with intricate Varishan symbols. Celtrax held it out carefully. Recognition of biological fortitude. Quentin accepted it, turning it over in his hand. It was surprisingly heavy. "Thanks," he said. "It's weirdly touching." Celtrax inclined his head. "You have altered our strategic protocols. Future interactions with your species will account for unexpected resilience." "Good," Quentin said, "because if you think a common cold is bad, you should see us after a breakup." Celtrax looked puzzled but didn't press. Ramirez packed up the med kit, snapping the latches shut. "You're clear to return to duty tomorrow if you feel up to it." Quentin swung his legs off the cot and stood carefully. His knees wobbled but held. "I'll survive," he said. As he stepped out into the cool night air, Celtrax and Vrexel fell into step beside him. Quentin pocketed the Varishan medal, feeling its comforting weight. "You have demonstrated considerable endurance," Celtrax said. "You've seen nothing," Quentin said. "Wait until you see us argue about pineapple on pizza." Celtrax paused. "Pineapple on pizza?" Quentin grinned. "Long story." They walked together in silence, the night wind stirring the dusty ground around them. Above, the stars wheeled on in their endless, silent dance. Behind them, the mobile med tent was already being packed away, the last traces of Quentin's impromptu trial disappearing into the darkness. It had been a strange few days, even by interspecies diplomacy standards. But Quentin knew one thing for sure. Humanity's reputation was now firmly and irrevocably established among the Varishans, not as conquerors, not as diplomats, but as the species too stubborn to die from a scratch, too ridiculous to fear a cold, and too unpredictable to ever be underestimated again.